Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very excited for our guest today, Anastasia. I want to interview you because you kind of achieved my goal is a nine-figure exit as well in my life. And my friends have recently been asking, like, what's, after, right? What is something you would tell someone like me, just like starting out their business journey, who's going to do an exit, to maybe not suffer some of the consequences or have the right expectations when they're about to have an exit?
I think the most important adjustment to make is to see the exit as just a step, as an extremely important step to a different goal. What I found in myself looking back and in many other people is that if we expect our exit to be, um, happily thereafter, that does not happen. Most of us simply assume that everything after that will be great. What I found is that an exit is simply a fantastic opportunity, which most of us, by the way, don't take. But it's a fantastic opportunity to grow and build that, fulfilling, beautiful, purposeful life of our dreams. But we still need to do quite a lot of work because what a successful exit does give us is extrinsic freedom. We can do what we want in a way, right? But we very often get trapped because we don't work on our intrinsic freedom, on realizing our intrinsic freedom, which is answering the questions, very existential questions, why we are here, who we are, what it is we have that we could offer the world. And unless we answer those questions, we never become fully free. So we never achieve that goal that most of us have and expectation from the exit, which is freedom through financial freedom. More often than not, people jump straight into some other activity to just stay so busy that they don't need to think about those things. In reality, if we program ourselves in advance that what I'm looking for is just the resources, the time, the space, the freedom, the wealth to finally realize myself fully, that would be much better because then we don't get disappointed because an expectation is positive and it should be positive, but not naive, like, oh, everything's going to be perfect because it's not. And generally,
Mm,
the more we know about what people commonly experience, the better.
hmm, hmm. And I mean,
So
I
for
guess,
yeah, for
yeah.
you, I would say, of course, if it's beautiful that you have an ambitious financial goal, fantastic. Just remember that it's in a way a huge step to liberate yourself, create opportunities, but that's all it is. You have opportunities at a different level. It's not a solution for all your problems by no stretch of imagination.
And I guess the people you've interviewed, what would you say are good examples of people you found really doing great after an exit, like really living their lives? Yeah.
So for most people, the process of rebalancing takes 10 years. That's how long it takes. And during that time, why it takes so long is that most of us in the beginning just try to escape. We try to be very busy. We go into angel investing. We sit on boards. We try to feel important and look important. And that is a huge waste of time if you look back. So after we do it for about 6, 7 years, this is usually when it really hits people that we are not going in the right direction, that we are not happier. Actually, for most of us, by that time, we've suffered financial losses because turning from from an entrepreneur to an investor is extremely hard, and most people underestimate it. So most
Isn't
go
it like
down. Yeah,
most venture
most go.
capitalists is negative 4% return?
Yeah, exactly. And then there are lots of challenges, including social challenges. For example, we find it very hard to say no to friends who ask us to support their businesses, or family to give them, which is great, right? But unless you think through this very carefully, we end up losing both money and relationships. So there are all these challenges after an exit that people usually are not prepared for. And generally, financially and emotionally, we go down before we go up. And most people hit their bottom in terms of happiness and also finances around year 5, 6, 7. And that's when we start thinking, okay, so what do I actually need to do? Some people go through therapy or coaching, or they just process
What
things
would you
themselves.
say is your own personal like time when like you kind of was rock bottom when you realized you had to do these things? Would you say?
Very similar. Again, at that time, I was sure that something was horribly wrong with me. Like I thought, oh my God, what's wrong with me? I should be happy. I'm not happy. I didn't know many people who, in the beginning, who went through a similar experience. Now there are more organizations for exited founders, which is great. I support all of them, and I think it's wonderful that people get together because this loneliness is the most dangerous thing. So I started luckily, I had this idea that I need to find people who've been through an exit and successfully got out. So I made it a point to go and look for them and listen to their stories and be very open minded. But I was only ready for it when I had to face the truth that I failed as an investor. I lost a lot of money. I wasn't happy as a person. I had no idea where to go. And even though I kept building businesses all this time, I wasn't becoming any happier. So that hit me around year 6. And this is what I also see in other people. I also did angel investing. And I was telling myself that I was giving back to the ecosystem and all these beautiful things I give to charity. Now I look back, I understand that if we are not ready for giving, if it's not genuine, then actually you don't get this reward in the form of fulfillment. So it still benefits someone, I hope, if I give to the right organizations. But in terms of the expectation of feeling better, doesn't do anything until you're ready. So what I'm trying to help people with now is um, showing them that we need to go through this personal growth. I am in a very happy place right now, but it did take a while. So going back to your question, um, it did hit me around year 6. I started looking for solutions much more actively. I looked before, but I really made it a priority. I divorced from my first husband. Actually, that a breakup triggered a lot of self-reflection and what is wrong, why it happened. I'm now happily remarried, and I have a third child. And again, I can't complain. But I didn't get there just by doing nothing. It required a lot of honesty and reflection, and again, talking to people who went through this. So now that I've talked to, hundreds of existing founders, I certainly see that pattern again and again and again. After year 1, we are all sure we know everything. We're sure that we are ready to move on. We found some great memes like Ikigai or something else that we think will solve all our problems. We're very optimistic. Around year 5, 6, 7, this is when it hits us. And we start climbing out. Around year 10, we are rebalanced and ready to move on and much wiser. I am absolutely sure it can be done faster. Absolutely sure, because lots of this time is simply wasted running in the wrong direction. So my purpose in life, my mission right now is actually to help people not do that, because I think the cost for both exited founders and the society is enormous. That decade in the life of some of the most capable people in our society is extremely expensive for all of us, because people usually in tech, for example, exit in their 40s, right? If you waste that decade when you're at the height of your energy and experience and everything, if you waste it, then you're in your 50s. And then, okay, you can teach people things, but it's much harder for most of us to start a new business, for example. While it would be very, good time to do it 10 years before or 9 years before. So I really hope that I can help others not to waste as much time as I did going in the wrong direction.
And who would you say are some of the people you've specifically interviewed that you think like good example of what to look for to not make the mistake, maybe?
Um, well, there are quite a lot of people I interview who I basically try to interview people at different stages in the post-exit journey. I think it's very important because the most helpful are those who sold more than 10 years ago. And I interview them and I try to really distill their lessons. But what I found is that it's sometimes hard for people who exited recently to really relate to those people because in those 10 years, they do so much work that they're in a very different space. So I try to interview people who also exited recently so my audience can relate to them easier. But I still do think that the most wisdom I get from those who went through the full cycle. So, for example, Vikrant Bhargava is a good friend of mine. I know personally what an amazing human being he is. But he sold his company 18 years ago, and he very honestly talks about what it meant for him and how long it took him. And now he is unbelievably impactful in the world. In fact, he mastered being incredibly efficiently impactful. Uh, I would say maybe more than anybody else I can immediately think of. But there are also other incredible people like Adrian Cohen, who created a unicorn um, uh, company, actually two unicorns now. But he is now fully focused on solving the problem of paralysis for people, and he's so driven by it. It's such a genuine source of motivation for him after he has proven to the world that he's perfectly capable of creating not one but two unicorns. Um, he's at a beautiful space, and if you listen to his interview, you can just see and hear it how balanced he is in terms of his purpose, but also his family. And he's incredible because he managed to do it very fast. He's very young still, and doing incredible work. He didn't lose that decade. And he explains very well why that is, because actually he's one of very few people whose family, whose parents did an incredible job of preparing him for something like that. So he wasn't shocked by it. It was actually never written by mine in the first place. So it didn't matter that much for him. And when he sold his company, simply he put money to have manage and move on to building up. But most of us don't have that. We waste a lot of time trying to be professional investors while we should be valued. Most of us, but some people are pulling
Mhm.
that. That's a different story. So Michael Sonnenfeld, who is the founder of Tiger 21, is another fantastic example of a person who made lots of mistakes, but has become such a beautiful, kind, spiritual human being through that experience.
Mhm.
So
I guess just as one thing interesting is you mentioned um, w- that the family was an important part of how he was able to have a successful exit. I guess manage his money. You personally, in some podcasts and writing, you've talked about your family, how it's an important part of everything you do. How would you say you go about raising your own kids? Because they could be easily spoiled. And I personally I'm very blessed to have gone to a really prestigious high school in South Korea. And I've seen kids who are the sons of the biggest law firms in South Korea, and they're very, very spoiled. And some people like today, his family is unbelievably rich, but he is such a kind-hearted kid. How are you trying to raise your own kids?
um, I love how you word the question because I think no parent can tell any other parent how to raise kids. It's such a difficult job, and it can only be done through trial and error. And we all screw up all the time. The question is whether we learn fast enough. It's very similar to building a startup. If you learn fast enough, then there is a chance you don't run out of time and you can still influence your children in a positive way because you learned through your mistakes. So that's pretty much what happened to me as well. I changed quite a bit how I direct my children, and at some point, I came to the conclusion that I want to make a few very radical uh, decisions and approaches. For example, my oldest son, who is 18 now, he's been financially independent since the age of 13. He's incredibly successful in his businesses, and he failed and he got up and he built a business again. So in those 5 years between 13 and 18, he learned so much that when I talk to him, it feels like he's in his mid 40s and a very experienced business person. I'm very happy for him in this sense. But if I try to credit myself for any of his success, then I would say there are few things I think I did right. One is I I have 3 boys, and I raised all of them unemployable. So my kids know that employment is not an option.
It's
Instead,
funny
when I
because
tell them,
my podcast mentor is his entire podcast is called Unemployable
oh,
Podcast.
really?
And
We,
he's my mentor who's helping guide a lot of decisions. And you
lucky
mentioned
you.
how and you
Lucky
mentioned
you.
how you gave a lot of distance to your kids early on, 13, like independence. It's something interesting because I recently interviewed the counselor for our school and the best prestigious schools in South Korea, basically counsel like the sons of Samsung, basically. Um, and I asked him, and he actually said the same thing. He says, what he found of the kids who are most successful in terms of just like everything, like financially, relationship, everything. He found that the parents tended to give a distance somewhat, and I found that to be true of for my own family because they allowed me to give me distance to develop who am I and who I am not, right? Because
Yeah.
sometimes it's more helpful to know who you are not than who you are.
Yeah. I assume when you say distance, they also let you make
Mm, eh,
mistakes, because
Yes,
that's very important, and it's very scary for parents. I wouldn't recommend it to anyone, but it's very important.
Hmm.
And it's also not very common, because unfortunately parents are led to believe that they need to micromanage kids, otherwise they're bad parents, and that doesn't benefit
Yeah.
children very often.
Yeah, it seems like it turns a little bit disastrous when everything is micromanaged, or if you don't really give them like a reason for doing it. Because I had friends of mine who are going to Ivy League universities, and one was just telling me like, I quit this. Like, I don't know why I'm doing any of this. Like, why do I need? Like, I don't even want to study med school. Like, I don't want to do any of this. Um, which is very funny. But I guess I'm just like going back on this is another thing I was very interested in is, um, one thing is, in life I have to make a lot of decisions, and even right now I have to make decisions, college or no college, what should I even eat or whatever big decisions in my life I need to think about. And what would you say are like resources you found along, I guess first your entrepreneurial journey, like resources you use for your life, and then I guess resources now you use for your current life, post exit, post I guess achieving things.
Um, well, there are certain people who I deeply admire, and whose advice I follow almost blindly, which for me is highly unusual, because I'm a big believer in the world never being black and white, and I never had much respect for authorities. But some people just prove to be incredibly wise, and Ray Dalio is a great example. For example, I literally use his framework for decisions on a daily basis, because his 5-step decision framework basically forces you to do two things: to have zero tolerance for problems uh, on your way. And I naturally am so optimistic that if not for his framework, I would just ignore problems. And I did it for many, many years in my life, until I just started being very disciplined, and his wisdom helped me so much in it. So not tolerating problems that you see on your way, facing them, dealing with them, thinking about them. And another part of his 5-step process is to always get to the root cause. And now I'm so trained to go to the root cause of every problem that I almost cannot not do it. And I know it's extremely important, because people so often address symptoms instead of the causes of problems. For example, in my work with exit paradox right now, that's the very heart of what I'm doing. I'm trying to tell people, please keep digging until you find those root causes. And this is where all your problems are. Stop addressing symptoms like, oh, I'm bored. This is the most typical post-exit problem. People say, oh, I'm bored. I'm going to go back to work. And then businesses fail. 70% of repeat businesses fail. And that's just ridiculous because these people have everything to succeed. Why do they fail? When I looked very, very closely at it, I now have a list of 30 reasons why repeat businesses fail. But when I started looking very closely into it, turns out that there are very few root causes, but you have to look for them. And if you find them, then there is no reason for these failures anymore.
Mm.
Ray Dalio is wise, and I just admire how generous he's been the last few years, giving his wisdom to the world. But there are other people like that as well. But it's usually, for me, those who already spent quite a lot of time processing their experiences and not thinking in oversimplified formulas and memes.
Yeah, there's a lot of wisdom to be gained, I guess. Like, I have mentors who've, one actually exited pretty very young. His advice are a lot different than another another mentor who's like a lot older, who has kids and who's like lived life, and he gives different advices because he reminds you that life is not in a couple of years, and decades. Um, you mentioned the resources you did after post-exit. What would you say are some resources? Because this is something I'm also kind of beginning the entrepreneurial journey. What are some resources that you use to help, I guess, your success for your first exit or your other exits? What do you think are some resources, books, videos, whatever?
In the beginning, mostly trial and error and a lot of pain. And then I would say, for me personally, by far the most impactful and consequential thing was doing this program at the Harvard Business School, which is called OPM, and it's specifically only for business owners. So they don't care if you ever went to school, which is interesting because you would think Harvard would care a lot about it, but they don't. In fact, they make the point of admitting lots of students who never went to school. But then they take you through lots of cases from very different industries, and they make you think through them together with 170 other successful entrepreneurs in the room, plus the best professors from that business school, to think through these problems together as an entrepreneur. And that was fantastic. And not only what we did in class, but also just getting to know these people. So that program, I just can't recommend enough, but it's only available at the stage in your business when you already have sufficient cash flows, because they actually want to see that you've built a company up to a certain level of revenue. When you're a startup, I think it's mentors. Elim, I'm so happy to hear that you mentioned mentors a few times. I think it is actually the most important thing. I had some mentors. I didn't have enough. I didn't appreciate them enough early on.
How much would you say is enough?
I'm
Would you say how much?
Oh, well, it's not the number, right? It's how much you retain from what they tell you. It can be one person whom you're really listening to. Because if you talk to other people who are now mentors, the most common complaint, and actually this is why so many people give up mentoring, they say it's so frustrating that we really pour our hearts out and we are trying to share wisdom just to see that, the younger person completely ignores it and goes ahead and makes the same mistakes we did. And then you feel like a failure because you try to help them, but it didn't work. It's one of the reasons why people stop mentoring, but also why people stop angel investing, because lots of angel investing is actually driven by the desire to help and not necessarily for the financial result. But if mentees are not actually interested, it's very discouraging.
Yeah. I remember, I forgot who it was, but someone, I was listening to a podcast, and he basically messaged a dude he was friends with and who was his mentee, and he basically said, you know, I know you're not gonna listen to what I'm gonna say, but here's what I think you should do. Uh, on it's interesting because I mean, I guess just going back to my counselor who was um uh, asked about some of the things, which is I've also have friends and I've had limited life experience, but I've given some like self improvement advice to some of my friends and close colleagues, and it's interesting. Like it's unless the person has sort of suffered or struggled through, they never really like learn. Usually, I mean, I've mentioned. Do you know Andrew Wilkinson by any chance?
Yeah, yeah, of course. It's never
Yeah,
enough. The author of Never Enough, right?
I recently read it, and
Oh yeah,
he was
brilliant.
mentioning that his what do you call it? He he says that he never like he had to learn every single one of his things from pain. Like he hasn't had really met anyone in his life. Would you say you've met some people who've like not learned? I mean, you've already mentioned there's some people who haven't like gone through all the pain, but
Yeah.
but do you think pain is just a requirement for at least success?
Um, and then what do you mean for someone to qualify as a mentor? Or
No, I'm saying like, do you think pain is like like do you think because okay for $100 million exit or a very large like exit, do you think it just requires an extraordinary amount of just suffering and I guess struggle to get there? Because you mentioned your early journey was very difficult.
to get to an exit, yes. I I won't lie. I haven't seen a single entrepreneur who hasn't suffered to get to a really big exit. There are people who are exceptionally great at, very, very talented at entrepreneurship, who just see fantastic business models and they can reach a certain level, especially if it's a relatively simple business with a lot of cash flow. They can become really successful with that. But if you want to build an organization which is sustainable, which can be sold to someone, I've never seen that without a lot of suffering. But suffering is great because that's how we learn, that's how we feel alive. There's nothing worse than the idea of, this comfortable life without suffering. Then you still suffer, but you suffer from horrible boredom and feeling useless. So
It's
suffering is
Jensen
not a
Huang.
bad thing. Suffering gives us meaning. I don't think meaning is possible without suffering. So we can just change our mindset about it and call it challenging and not suffering.
Okay. I think Jensen Huang also interestingly he literally said he literally in his company model just embraced suffering. He was saying, "I really, really want you to suffer," and I found that interesting to say the least. I guess just moving on. Another question is you know, this is a large thing of how important passion is, like in like entrepreneurship or something. People have different opinions. What would you say is your personal opinion? How important do you think passion is, and to success or towards the success of the business you're doing, or do you think it doesn't really matter?
I was trained as a lawyer and I practiced M&A law in New York for 5 years at this tough law firm called Skadden. And they trained me to find every single term. So when you say passion, for me, that's millions of in that word, right? So I'm a huge believer in motivation. I think motivation is extremely, and I personally, when it comes to entrepreneurship, feel that motivation and passion are the same system. Because if you talk about passion as just as an emotion, it's irrelevant. But motivation, if, if it's sustainable passion, can drive us and pull us incredibly out and far to our goal. And managing our motivation wise probably one of the most important skills in obtain as an entrepreneur. Because it's so hard to create something valuable out of a complete chaos, to make your dream a reality, it's so extremely hard that unless you pulled with unreasonable power towards your goal, I don't think you can ever get there. I don't think discipline alone will ever get you there. So if your question is about powerful motivation and feeling pulled, I think it's absolutely critical. Nothing happens without it. If your question is more about, oh, I'm passionate about it because it looks sexy and cool and all of that, but as soon as you hit a difficulty, you're no longer motivated, then this passion is totally useless. And that's probably why people argue about it so much, because the term is not defined as a lawyer would do.
Interesting. Hmm. And what would you say was your motivation starting off your first company?
Um, well, going back to the time when I was a lawyer and I worked 20 hours a day without days off, I learned a lot in those 5 years, but I very clearly felt that I was in a completely wrong place, and it's just not my thing. And then um, I got stuck in this vicious cycle when I knew I was not going in the right direction, but I felt I needed to be ambitious, and I was losing my ambition because I wasn't interested in becoming, um, a better lawyer. And I was extremely lucky because I, by pure chance, met someone who had just moved from Silicon Valley, and that person introduced me to Silicon Valley. And I immediately recognized that this is my tribe. This is where I want to be. And I left my successful legal career in Manhattan and joined a tiny little startup, and never looked back, never regretted it for a second. And my motivation at the time, frankly, was just to feel that happiness, feel being pulled, being excited, being alive, because after 5 years of legal practice, I just became very unhappy. If um, I think if that happened under different circumstances, I probably would be more thinking about, financial independence or something like that. But my pain of being stuck, unhappy, and in the wrong place was just uh, much stronger at the time than fear of poverty, which is another big driver for many people.
Hmm. Hmm. Seems very common that a lot of founders I see, they kind of worked a normal job or like a pretty intensive job, and then they really did not like it, and then they changed.
So you mentioned that you are debating whether you should go to college or not. So share your thinking with me, please.
Yeah, it's changing day by day because I mean, not day, yeah, in all honesty, but my thought is my family, we have decent wealth. It's not amazing where I don't feel very safe because I have other siblings at home. I'm calculating that because we're going to a private school, and in Korea it's more expensive than other countries. I still don't know why it's so expensive, but we pay that much. So I really want to make sure my siblings, one is first grade, one is 10th grade, does not, struggle and still continues because we've sort of faced our, so I want to avoid that. So I don't want to put too much burden on my own family financially or just the risk of it, right? We want to be safe and floating. So I'm thinking about that. But then I'm thinking some colleges definitely do have a benefit, even if I drop out, right? Some colleges just have a nice brand name to it. So I'm thinking maybe that could help. So I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to apply to these name brand colleges. And
Mhm.
then if I do not get in, I'll either go to school of scholarship and then just drop out and just so I can get into the States or to San Francisco specifically. It's
Okay.
one of the places I'm thinking of. Because I've just heard from Scott Galloway, if you've heard, he was saying how
Yeah.
important it is that you go to a big city. You personally been to New York. So
Yeah.
I'm thinking, okay, maybe I should go to New York. Yeah, I should probably go to big cities with a lot of people. And the only way I'm thinking right now, just like visa wise, is college. So I'm thinking it's sort of a necessity for me to go to college. But then I can choose like the really not low brand, like no one really knows of them, but for free or with very cheap, or just go to nice
Yeah.
brand. Those are what I'm kind of thinking for now. And then drop out soon.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. But best of luck in that decision. I guess you're the only one who knows what would be a good idea for you.
Yeah, I'm kind of worried because I feel like looking back, I mean, I guess everyone I've interviewed, they look back and they, I guess, regret some decisions, and some decisions made a lot. They don't really regret, but they kind of, I think they would have preferred if they didn't choose that decision. So I kind of want to make sure, like, whatever choice I choose is not a choice I'll regret. But that's life, I guess.
I,
Like you've
I,
said.
I, I generally am a huge supporter of young people living in big cities. You're totally right. And I'm very happy I lived in some of the world's most exciting cities. You learn so much, you're exposed to so many fascinating people. I think it's great. So, I absolutely
Hmm.
understand if that's what you want.
Hmm. But would you personally, your son isn't going to college, if I'm correct? Your oldest son?
Well, yeah, my oldest son is debating. Uh, and I'm giving him a lot of space, and I talk to him a lot about it. And that's one of the reasons I was curious about your opinion, because that conversation is constantly happening in my home. um, I do lean towards him going to the right university, but again, it has to be the right university, and definitely shouldn't be something for the brand. That's just silly. And I also met so many people who went to very famous universities, and actually that creates certain problems for them, because then they expect that doors will be open, and they are not necessarily open. Like in the law firm that I mentioned before, uh, when I joined, there were lots of people who came from the top universities, and a year later, many of them were gone because they just couldn't tolerate the pressure and the pain that this job required. Um, so
Then
I
what would you
don't
say are the
think
right
for my,
colleges?
I think it's extremely important that people around you are inspiring. So going to a college where people are not inspiring is also a waste of time.
Hmm.
So one has to find that particular balance where they're inspired and pulled and they're surrounded by incredible people, but very real, very genuine people, not necessarily being surrounded by a brand which gives you an illusion that somehow you're more successful than you deserve to be just because you happen to be associated with a brand.
Sure. What would you say are some colleges you're thinking of, maybe universities? I'd love your recommendation.
I don't think I'm the right person to ask, to be honest, because again, it's so much about what it is you want to get out of it. I think it's wrong to say that one university is better than another for everyone. I think if you don't want to be a scientist, you shouldn't go to a university which is strong in science, right? And there is Babson University, which is just for entrepreneurs. But when my oldest son asked me if maybe he should go there, I said, what's the point? You already are a successful entrepreneur. If you want to go to university, go there because you want to study something that requires you being in university. For example, in his case, it's biochem, and you can't really learn biochem sitting at home in front of YouTube. You just can't, because you need labs, you need lots of other things. So, for example, in his case, I said, okay, if you are interested in learning science, sure, find the university which is really good at this particular science and go there. But for him, entrepreneurship is not a good idea. At the same time, his friend is going to Babson this year, and I think it's a great choice for that particular person, because they don't have experience in entrepreneurship, but they are really interested, and the family is not very entrepreneurial, so it would be something that they would be exposed to something that the family couldn't possibly give them. It's great.
If you could travel back to your own 17-year-old self, or I'm turning 18, so 18-year-old self, what would you tell yourself?
What would I tell myself? Go travel. Because when once you have a job or a business or children, you cannot do that. I think we need to do the right things at the right time. And if you're 17 and you are not sure about the university, maybe going and traveling and meeting as many different types of people is exactly what you need. I think when you are young, having experiences, especially challenging experiences, is extremely important. You don't know what you don't know, and that should really be your motto. So you shouldn't be limiting your experiences by anything, because objectively, you don't know anything, with all due respect. Neither do I, by the way, but, but I do have a
But you know
very
more than me.
but this attitude, we don't know what we don't know, and the idea that do the right thing at the right time if you can, is very important. At 17, you can absolutely afford wasting, quote unquote, a year or two, because it's not going to be a waste. It's going to be the most consequential, most impactful investments you can make. And if you go to countries very, very different from yours and cultures, that would be particularly beneficial. Like, for example, I had 2.5 immigrations, and as I like to say, I immigrated from Russia, where I grew up, into the US, where values are pretty much the opposite. Like things that Americans think are good, lots of Russians think are bad, and vice versa. And that's great, because it forced me to accept, like to try to think like why. It's a paradox in a way, right? Your brain has to find a solution for why both realities that contradict each other may coexist and may be equally good, right? That's what immigration does to you. So if you go and live somewhere for long enough, unless you are a very closed-minded person who will just sit there and either hate the old country or the new country, if you actually try to understand your new reality, it really helps you grow. And then I moved from the US to the UK, and I thought they would be very similar, and they're not. There are also a lot of things that are quite different. And then I ended up moving to France, and then moving back to the UK. And France is yet a completely different universe from either Russia, the US, or the UK. And I'm so grateful to all these countries that they help me understand that the world can be so full of beautiful paradoxes. And I'm sure it inspired me to think of exit in that way as well, because exits do create a lot of beautiful paradoxes. And if we run away from them, just thinking, oh, there is this contradiction which I cannot handle, then we miss the opportunity of the lifetime. So that was a very long answer to your question. What I would tell myself, go travel, be very, very open, and look for these paradoxes, like hunt for them, try to not just embrace them, but actually find these contradictions in life and then solve them. Because in those solutions, usually there is so much excitement and surprises and beauty.
Mm. I guess Korea is one of the biggest paradoxes in that it is, I guess, has the most economic progress in one of the in like 50 years, but it's the highest depression rate. It's the highest suicide rate, one of the most highest in the world. So I guess,
And I'm sure there
interesting.
is a solution if you try to think of how these things coexist. You may find there is actually a link between them, and that will be the solution. But I have to say that Koreans is by far my most favorite nation in the world. I don't know what it is.
Really?
Every time I meet a Korean, there is so much kindness, and we connect very well, and there's so much generosity. I don't like generalizing, but there is something about the Korean civilization, culture, and people that is so attractive to me personally. I actually joked with a Korean friend of mine recently that I should have been born in Korea. I feel so connected. Maybe that should be my next immigration.
Well, so Seoul is pretty nice. I think English is so you can still get by. Okay, everyone still speaks English, so it is.
But that's
Um,
okay. That's okay. I'm sure I'll find a way to
well,
communicate.
Anastasia. Yeah. Yeah, I think as AI evolves, I've seen people just using this bot and just speaking, and it works all fine. But Anastasia, I'm so thankful for you for being on the pod. It was my pleasure. I learned so much. And yeah, thank you so much.